special guest? Who's the special
Yes, I
guest?
do. Hi, I'm Laura's friend. I can talk anything and he doesn't respond to me. He just
It's the
listens.
best relationship.
Ah,
So today we're going to talk about working with difficult people, managing those relationships. And, challenging behaviors can surface in work relationships, but also, of course, personal relationships. And this can look like many different things. I think some people might think it looks like this, where you're working with someone who's always angry or maybe frustrated. For sure, there might be people who have aggressive communication styles. They're always talking over you, they're always interrupting you, maybe even telling you what to do all the time. But sometimes it could be someone who's passive, someone who doesn't make decisions, so they always seem indecisive or even disconnected because that's just their style. They don't really speak up for themselves. So that can be frustrating. So when that happens, obviously there's different ways you can deal with it. We talked previously about the really difficult relationships. You might have to come to the decision to cut those people off because there's just no working with them. But in a lot of instances, there are ways to figure out how to manage some of the frustrating parts of that person so you can make the relationship work. So today we're going to talk about our own experiences with working with some more challenging relationships and maybe even reflect on times that we were difficult and how we were able to acknowledge that and shift the way we acted. Now, I want to say very upfront that we have to be careful when we say someone is difficult, because for sure there are people who, like the first person I mentioned, the aggressive person who's always interrupting you, talking over you, maybe even seems overtly aggressive. Those are really tough relationships to work with. But sometimes it could be someone who just has a difference of opinion or always asks questions. I'm thinking like in work situations, and we don't want to seem dismissive of them by labeling them difficult. In fact, sometimes those actions can be helpful because it makes us think about things differently. And so we have to just be open to giving them the space for that. But yes, there are some genuinely tougher relationships to manage. And so we're going to dive into our experiences with that. Are we ready? Ready.
yay.
All right. So the first question I have for each of you is tell us about a difficult relationship that you worked through and how was it difficult? And I'll start this time with Aunt Lauda.
Woo. Okay, well, the first thing that came to my mind was back on the 1990s when I started working for the airline. We opened the airline actually at that time, so we were like six people at the most. And one of them was so, she had a bad reputation, and we wondered why did they hire her anyways. But anyway, she was part of the team, and yeah, unfortunately, she had very bad issues in her personal life, but all the time she expressed being angry and mad at you. You couldn't even really talk to her. Actually, many people got afraid of her because she used to be threatening people. And she lasted a couple of years there, but yeah, it was tough. It was tough because trying to open a new business, of course, your customer service, you have to be always polite. And when you're inside of this environment, that someone is really angry and actually, I would say even mad and treat you all the time, it was really scary.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
definitely sounds like it could be scary, especially in a work situation where you can't avoid the relationship. It sounds like they were a person that was part of the team. I think what was validating was that you weren't the only one who saw the behavior. So it wasn't just like it's a one-on-one issue where you're the only one seeing this problem. That doesn't mean it makes it easier. And we're going to talk in a little bit about how you figured out ways to work with that person. But that's a tough experience because, I mean, work is such a big part of your life when you're working that I'm sure you had moments you were thinking, oh, great, I have to go tomorrow and see this person again, which makes it
Yes,
really hard to even get your work done, right? Sometimes with that kind
exactly.
of personality. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
How about you, Mom?
Well, at work, when I worked in later years in the preschool, we would find sometimes, a difficult personality among the preschool teachers. But I think we would try to set on the basis of doing what was best for the children. So talking clearly, would easily put things together. A difficult personality, I would think also of my brother who had the alcoholic problem. It was difficult to get through to him more than his personality because he was kind of easygoing for his situation. So you try to, talk clearly, trying to help him, trying to convince him to get professional help. And when it's a situation like that, it's difficult to get through. I found it like a difficult type of situation and personality in a way. We couldn't convince him to, really take care of him. That was difficult.
Yeah, yeah. And I know we talked about that before, and I appreciate you sharing both a work situation and a personal situation because you might have to navigate those differently with work relationships. You know, you're working with them in a certain time frame, get through the day and let it pass until the next time. With family, it's a little different, or personal relationships, right? Because in some senses, they're always around and you have to figure that out. And we talked before about the impact of substance use, alcohol use on relationships, and how it can be really add a layer of difficulty in managing that relationship because when they're in that space where they're actively using and don't see a problem, it's harder to convey the impact of their behavior on you because they're not seeing that. And so it just makes it that much tougher to try to work through that. Yeah. I think for me, what comes to mind, I'm still working. And so I think I come across a lot of challenging relationships in that environment. And one comes to mind for me with someone who consistently used, I won't say used me, but I think in general tried to find the easy way through projects. And so a lot of that was pulling on other people's work. Have you done this already? Have you done that already? And basically absorbing the work you've done to integrate into their new project and essentially made their work much easier. And the thing about it is, this person tends to be really quiet in meetings. And when things come up, new projects come up, and there's talk about it, I can already see the wheels turning. Let me look at the room and see who has done this already. So then I can reach out to them and pull their project, pull the work they've already done to now apply it to my thing and make it mine. And so I recall distinctly there was a meeting where this person was going to expand on something I had already done a lot of training on, a lot of work on. And the goal was to help them design this new curriculum. And essentially, what they wanted was all my material. And so I
Wow.
remember in the meeting, I was waiting for the ask of like, well, didn't you already do this training?
Mhm.
And so I was waiting for it. And when it came to that, of course, I said yes. And I just kind of cut to the chase and said, if you want it, go to this person who has it on file, just get it. Because I knew that's what was coming. But then when more questions surface about how I did the training or more process oriented things, I basically shut down. I basically said, you can review the material and figure it out because
Of
this is not the
course.
first time that you've just taken my material and, use
Wow.
it as your own, but I'm not going to help you more than that. You can read and you can figure it out and you can
Of
decide how you
course.
want to work with it, right? And I think and I didn't always do that. I think I had reached a point because I'd been working with this person for years and I think was generally more accommodating and tried to be more helpful. But once I saw the pattern, of course, I was tired of that, exchange. And so I think once I was very short about it, they didn't reach out to me anymore. And so,
Good.
and we were in different departments, so it wasn't like I had to work with them every day as a team member. And so it was much
Yeah.
easier to distance myself from that person. And I think they realized
Yeah.
like don't come back to me with that kind of ask again, because that's the last time you're taking my material.
That
So
is so bad.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
difficult, yes.
Yeah, and they only got it when I was resistant to just giving it and giving them what they wanted, you know.
Yeah, you have to change your the logistic of doing your things, right? Your own project because of these people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Okay, so we started diving a little bit into this. What steps did you take to try to work with these challenging relationships? So I know I talked a little bit about this particular person and how I had to stop responding with being as helpful as I was in the past. And and I think even if this person relayed messages through like my supervisor or someone else on my immediate team, I think I would redirect them. You know, they can go to this person or this resource for what they need, just to cut off that ongoing access to me and to my materials. And eventually, like I said, they got the message and they stopped coming to me directly and didn't ask for my materials again.
Good.
How about you, Aunt Laura? How did you deal with that difficult person at work?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was so hard to get close to her actually because she was old, didn't want to even speak. It was just a weird attitude. But at the end, there were situations that we had to work together. So we have to kind of combine getting teamwork and you do this and I do that. And I started to open up, listening to her. And when we got breaks, we talk. And she started talking about her personal life, her issues, her things. Sometimes even I remember he said, well, we should go out. And, I have a lot of friends in the bars and things like that. And I go, well, why not? But yeah, at the end, you open up, you just try to reconnect to this person and understand. And of course, there was a point that I actually told her, why did you have this attitude? Are you angry all the time? And not only me, but my boss as well. They used to have conversations in performance interview, and of course, she always had this situation. But yeah, I mean, at the end, I think we resolve it that way. Working together. Period. If you don't work with me and I don't work with you, something's going to go wrong, and we're going to go out of this business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, that we end up, talking, even going out. This person, yeah. But at the end, she got fired. She didn't last long.
Yeah, and you kind of saw
Yeah.
that coming because she was consistently that way, where she was hard to work with. But you touch on some
Yes.
some important things, which is understanding what's beneath the behavior that you're seeing, right? And it's not always easy to uncover that. You got to a point where you were able to get her to talk about the personal things that were probably causing her stress and probably bled into the way she was at work. And that helped her connect with you in some ways, and maybe at times made the work relationship a little easier, even though it sounds like in the end, not enough to keep her job,
No.
unfortunately. But we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that. Like, what are some of the common reasons that we see these difficult behaviors surface? And when we uncover those things, then it helps us find ways to work more effectively with those people. But first, we'll hear from Mom. And how did you work with the difficult relationships you talked about?
Well, yes, because one of the things that I think is you try to empathize with the situation, like seeing the person's difficult personality, or if they have problems, or if there is something going on that you don't really know. But you also have to see, is this really working or is terribly negative? Like in the case of our brother, that we tried to convince him to take, to have professional help. We ended up by just talking to him clearly and saying, he was living with my sister at the time. Ended up telling him, you have two options: either you do something about your problem, your health, and get professional help, or you're going to have to go and live on your own in the whatever consequences, because sometimes there is only so much you can do. For example, in my marriage, that I had was a difficult personality of his. Probably his, like we said sometime before, like I said, maybe his temperament and the fact that he was on the Marines, and that probably in a way or the other affects the way you are, is difficult to communicate, well, if the person thinks that, you're right. So I try to be as assertive and self-centered as I could. But I think it also depends how the other person responds to. If it's a difficult person, how much is willing the person to cooperate.
So did you find, let me ask a question, which is, did you ever find an effective way to break through? Like Aunt Lauda was able to get this seemingly angry person eventually to open up about what was behind her anger, right? These personal issues. Did you ever find an effective way to work with one of those difficult relationships, and what was it that you did?
Well, like in the case of my brother, the ultimatum sometimes would make him change for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But it was unfortunately temporary. In the case of my marriage, it was more difficult because there was only so much I could do. What I could do is, talk and explain as clearly and assertively as possible my feelings or my thoughts. But it's a difficult personality to get to a positive result if the person is not really willing to or doesn't validate what you're saying.
Mm.
That I think is one of the big problems if the difficult personality does not validate what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And at times you have to say, okay, I need to take some time and we'll return
Mm-hmm.
to this talk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or like in the case of your marriage, you say, this isn't working and you have to end the relationship also. Yeah.
True, true.
Well, there are some general tips to working with more challenging people, and I'm going to cover those. And then I'm going to cover some types, if you want to call them, and how to identify maybe what their underlying why is, and then how to work with them more effectively. Some general reasons for seeing this behavior: it can be fear and insecurity, stress overload, which sounds a little bit like the person you were working with, Aunt Lauda.
Mhm.
Past experiences, call them traumatic experiences. Also, different communication styles, which we've all kind of hinted at, but even culturally, for example, and I think about the work situation, there might be some cultures where a more quiet, reserved style is more common. And so when they come in contact with someone who's more aggressive or more bossy or more, like I mentioned, the first type of being even talking over you, interrupting you, that might come off as off-putting and start creating that difficulty. And then finally, unmet needs might be what's underneath their why of why you're seeing that behavior. Now, some types, and before I get to the types, some general tips in working with more challenging people. One is to lead with empathy, which, Mom, you mentioned leading with empathy. And I think even at Lauda, you try to lead with empathy with this person to understand them, to stay calm. And this is difficult when someone is more aggressive, right? And there are
Yeah.
even people who try to get a response from you. And so it's really difficult to say, I'm not going to respond, I'm going to stay calm, but that helps sometimes diffuse their behavior because they're not getting the result they want. Listening is also important, to really listen to what they're asking for and try to even listen what's behind what they're asking. We talked about this, trying to remain assertive, right? Not feed into, again, their process and respond equally aggressive or in a way that's not productive. Setting boundaries, and that is like what you were talking about, Mom, trying to maintain a stance with, I'll say, like your ex-husband, my dad, and hold to some boundaries, continue to express yourself. And then when you come across, a point where you're saying this isn't going to change, then the boundary might be, we have to get a divorce. This relationship isn't working anymore. Trying not to be defensive and trying not to judge. And trying not to judge comes with empathy. When you can empathize, it pulls you back a little bit from judging the person. So those are just some general tips. Not always easy to access, but if you keep some of them in mind, then when you're confronted with that difficult person, you can try to access some of those to have a response that diffuses, like I said, diffuses that intensity of that interaction. Now, there are some types, I'm not going to go through all of them, but these might sound like people that we would say we've worked with or interacted with who seem difficult. One is the pessimist, and this is the person who is, we say here in the States, a Debbie Downer, someone who's always seeing the negative, thinks everything is going to go badly, and so they always say this isn't going to work. We can't do this. And part of the why behind that could be that that's been their experience. Maybe they've had a lot of bad situations or the worst outcomes have happened. Maybe they're highly anxious and anticipate something's not going to go well. And by putting it out there already, maybe they think they'll be less disappointed because they already expected it to go that way. And so when you come across someone like that, you can try to nudge them to find solutions. And that's not easy to do, but I think the key is trying to move them away from, what they think is down the line and help them pull back a little bit and say, well, what if we try this? What if we do this? And again, because sometimes they're so set in that way that they can't see past the negative, then a very simple tip is to just break them out of their mood because sometimes this person is also more on the depressed side. And sometimes you can break the mood by maybe showing them a funny video. Just get them out of the momentum they have to see something as negative or not going to work out. So that's the pessimist. The know-it-all is the person who comes in and says they have all the answers. So maybe if a new project is presented, they dive right in and say, well, I know about this, 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 and this is how we should do it, and et cetera, et cetera. And it could be that they have found their own validation in knowing things. Maybe that's how they got recognized in their own family system or up to that point in their work. That was the thing that made them special. And so they feel like sharing that information gives them value. And that's good. But of course, it may make other people not have a voice in the situation because they dive in like, this is the answer, this is the solution. So I think it's important to acknowledge and to give them that validation they want and say, wow, like you know a lot about this subject. You clearly have a lot of experience in this. I'm wondering what's one important thing we can pull from what you shared to have a conversation about how we proceed with this, right? In that way, they've contributed, that you've acknowledged that they know a lot about this subject, and they can have that validation, but still be part of a conversation that involves everybody else. Hopefully. The bossy person is the person who has to have control and, tells you what to do. There's no room to have a conversation. And again, it could be maybe their upbringing was such that they didn't have a lot of control. And so now they find comfort in having control. They have to have control. And that's really tough because unlike the person I just talked about before, the bossy person, this person wants to bulldoze and just say, this is how we're going to do it. So it might be tougher to do, especially in a work environment, especially if this person is a superior. But you might have to say something like, I know you feel strongly about that, but I'm wondering if we can step back and look at some other options so that you can open the space for, I know you already see a solution for this, but I'm wondering if we can take a step back and consider all angles of this, other angles of this, to maybe look at other potential options and see if that works. And then the last one I'll cover is the gossiper, which is the person who comes in and is always talking about other people. We say chisme, but this is the person who's always talking about other people. And part of it might be that they're more comfortable not having the attention on themselves. So they want to talk about other people. They want the attention away from themselves. And if this is how they are all the time, that can feel uncomfortable, right? Especially if you're not really into what it is they're talking about. What you can try to do is redirect the conversation, and it can be as simple as, if it's a work situation, maybe can we focus on the project that's due on Friday? What about this? So that you just sort of cut off their conversation about somebody else. And if that doesn't work, the redirection doesn't work, you might have to be direct with them and say, I'm really sorry, but I'm not comfortable talking about that person or that thing, that situation. Can we please focus on the project that we have to work on? And so those are some of the ways to work with those specific types. I don't know if any of that sounds familiar, if you've encountered those kinds of people.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
All of them. All of them.
All of them. And I don't know if you've tried those things with those particular individuals and if you found them effective at all. For sure, I'll say like very few times I've encountered the gossiper, but I've had to be direct and say, I'm not really interested in talking about that. Can we focus on this other thing?
Quiet. Let me talk about important things. Yeah, definitely. You have to be, the worst scenario is when you are managing a team, you're the manager of a group of people. And of course, they all want to be involved, but you can tell someone is gossip or bossy or something like that because, right away they react that way, and here you are trying to put everything in balance, like you said, follow these tips. And that really depends on your attitude at that time, on your mood, I would say. Because sometimes, you're dealing with a stress situation, especially in my job that I used to do, a stress passenger or an accident or an incident or something that happened, and you have to react.
Mhm.
And when you start hearing these people around, and kind of getting the situation worse instead of helping, it's tough. It's tough to react with calm, and empathy because you just have to say, you know what, please leave the room or please wait until I say, what it has to be done or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, stop them right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you have the luxury of time to really access those tips and then respond a certain way, that's great. But if it's in a time-bound situation or you need immediate action, you don't have that luxury. So you may just have to cut them off and say, stop, this is what we need to do. And like Mom said too, it's important that we maintain reasonable expectations because even if you use these tips, that may not change these individuals' behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is your attempt to say, I know there's something behind why you're presenting this way, and I want to try to work with that so that we can get something done or achieve something or make this relationship work. But if it doesn't work, it's not a reflection necessarily of you, right? There's just some individuals who are stuck in that mode. And that's when you have to make the tougher decision to say, do I need to limit my interactions with this person or do I need to cut them off completely because it's toxic or even abusive at this point and I can't continue to try to work with that? Obviously, in a work relationship, that may be a little different because you don't have the choice always to say, I'm not working with this person anymore. And so that may be where it becomes a little tougher. So knowing these tips and just knowing when you can access them at least helps you figure out how can I best manage it, even if it doesn't, totally change the way this person tends to act or behave. Yeah.
Correct.
I'm wondering if any of you has ever been accused of being difficult. And was there truth to that? So I'll start with Aunt Lauda.
Of course,
She
that
laughs.
cost me my job. People can tell many things about whoever they want, right? And unfortunately, I lived that bad experience because handling a group of people of 30 people, only 5 took to write a letter and say all these lies and whatnot, and really become a terrible situation for me. And of course, there wasn't much to do. Unfortunately, these people were supposed to be working together with me, like double faces.
Mm.
And that's the thing, when you start trusting people, you have to be so careful who really you trust. And in my case, I learned the lesson, of course, and it took me a while. But, now I can say, I did everything correct because out of the 30, only 5 only wrote things, very bad of you. But at the end, you know what the truth is. So yeah, it could be really bad.
And I'm glad you had that perspective too, because it's hard when there's a group that sort of get together to do something like that against you. And to be able to step back and say it was 5 out of 30 that did this, right? And it's also tough when it starts to make you question yourself, right? Like, is any of this really true? Did I come off this way? But
Yeah,
realizing like this is 5 out of 30, this clearly was a group that had some bad intentions against you, and to, reflect on, no, I'm still me. I'm these aren't true, is
right.
important so that you're not completely overcome by that situation. But that's a tough one for sure. I know for me, like in talking about the example that I gave, I know I was perceived as being difficult because I wasn't willing to give up information. And what's interesting is I see that as setting a boundary for myself. I don't trust your behavior because all you do is take and take and take things that I've created to make them your own. Time has shown that it's not like it's a one-time thing. And I'm setting a limit to say, get the material, but don't ask me any more questions, right? But the perception is that I'm not collaborating. Now I'm mean. And so maybe you could say, if this is the first time I'm doing that and I'm setting that limit, maybe you would say this seems out of place or unlike me, but that's out of the need to preserve my own sense of self, right? And my own needs of valuing my work and my creativity or whatever the case is, that now is being taken by somebody else to claim as their own. And so I think, again, drawing that boundary made that person realize, like, I'm not doing this anymore. And they have not come to me directly since then because they see I've drawn that line. I'm not the person to continue to use in that fashion. So did I do anything to change that? Not really. I mean, I'm polite when I interact with that person when I have to, but I'm not willing to engage in those kind of conversations anymore. Yeah.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
know your people.
Yeah. How about you, Mom? Have you ever been seen as difficult? I can't imagine, but
Well, you need to, you don't have to take to be ill-treated, like or wrong-treated, as in your both cases. You have to speak sometimes your mind. Now, I don't know that I'm a difficult person per se, but I've been told that I don't listen very well when I'm told something, that I'm easily distracted, and then I go with, oh, okay, everything is fine. So I don't know if I need to be more clear or more responsive, if you will, because they say it's difficult. It's difficult to ask me an opinion about something because they say, don't ask Anna because she always says, oh, yes, it's nice. So she's always going to say the same thing. I need to be probably more attentive. I try to be more attentive, to pay attention and to speak clearly, because sometimes you just
Yeah,
say, well, okay, I'll go with the flow, but you need to be assertive at times and clear so there is no
yeah,
misunderstanding.
yeah.
That could be a difficulty, in my
And it
personality.
comes right now to my mind that it's about training your mind, your isn't it? It's like you have to practice it often, often, not really being in the place like at work, but you have to do some kind of a practice in
yeah,
your mind that is
yeah.
all about that.
It's practicing the skills, and maybe those listening to this will hear something that sounds like someone they've worked with or interacted with and say, okay, that is a tip I'll try to use with that person next time, and see if it shifts that relationship for the positive, right? And again, have reasonable expectations because things won't change overnight, or they may not change at all, but try a new method. And so if you heard this conversation and something stood out to you, whether they sound familiar or you've done some of these things to make a relationship work better, let us know in the comments. If you liked this conversation, hit the like button and the subscribe button because we have a lot more coming. But before we wrap up, let's introduce ourselves. That's my tia,
Laura,
my mom,
Anna.
I'm Joanna, and you have a special guest. Who's the special
Yes, I
guest?
do. Hi, I'm Laura's friend, private friend.
We always love
Monkey's
guest
house.
appearances.
He can talk anything and he doesn't respond to me. He just
It's the
listens.
best relationship.
The best.
Well, on that note, we want to remind people whether it's good, bad, or funny,
Leave it
Live
up.
it up.